Anyway, okay, so we're back,
Yeah.
and we are. You just wanted to talk about 5 fairly unrelated directors,
But also
except that they're all not working anymore.
No. But their work has been so interesting, and we pick people that we hear about all the time. But there are other people who have done nice work that kind of get lost under the radar, and so the films provide wonderful fun,
Absolutely.
for them, and so that's why I picked these people, because I thought, first of all, they are the foundation of a lot of the people who are working today, and for other people who want to be filmmakers, I think it's instructive for them to look at some of these.
Oh, absolutely. And
So
the 5 people are Ida Lupino,
yes,
Don Siegel,
right.
Richard Brooks,
Mhm.
Vincent Minnelli, and Blake Edwards.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I may have changed Richard Brooks. I don't remember because I.
You didn't change and notify me.
Well, okay.
So we can, who did you change it to?
I don't remember, but we can talk because I have a list of things.
What's your list?
That I wrote down, and so we have Blake Edwards, Don Siegel, Douglas Sirk who I think.
We can talk about Douglas
We
Sirk
can talk
instead.
about both. Yeah, I would
Whatever.
talk about Richard Brooks too.
Right. Anyway, okay. Let's start with Ida Lupino.
Okay. Female director for one thing.
The first female female Hollywood star
Yes.
to direct her own movies.
We should qualify that to say the sound era. There were several in the silent era.
Okay.
But in the sound era, and the only reason she was able to do it was using her clout as a popular actress to do it. What I find interesting about her work is that she strikes me, looking at it retrospectively, from this perspective versus when I first saw the films when I was much younger, is that she strikes me as an independent working within the studio system, in the sense that her films really dealt with small domestic circumstances, frequently crime, and they also were low budgeted. That's what gave them the independent quality. Was they were low budgeted, and she co-authored several of them, sometimes singly authored them, also directed the pictures, frequently fixed the lighting and everything else, and so it really was an independent process.
And she
that
did
she
it.
Involved.
It was a partnership with her husband,
Right.
Collier Young,
Yes.
right?
She was interesting with that. She did that with him, but the fact that she wanted to do it, got the opportunity, and worked this way.
Right.
Because she could have probably attempted, and later on she did do some what we call real mainstream work. But the films that, like The Bigamist and The Hitchhiker and things like that, they were really second features. And one of the things that I find that she has in common with the independent people is she didn't use what were the people who considered the leading men of the time. She used the character people.
Yeah.
And gave them leads. Edmund O'Brien, William Tallman, people like that. Yeah.
Right.
So that was interesting about her work. And she had a very small body of work because she...
I think only 5 pictures, 5 or 6 pictures.
Right. And simultaneously is working as an actress. What I liked was also how she referred to herself and became referred to later on. As an actress, she was always being referred to as the poor man's Betty Davis. And as a director, she referred to herself as the poor man's Don Siegel.
That's interesting.
Which is interesting because it tells you the ambition she aspired to.
That's cool.
And he's one of the people that we had
that we're going to be talking. Yeah. When you suggested we talk about her, I actually had not seen anything she directed. I think I told you that. So I thought, well, I better watch something before we do it.
Sure.
And The Bigamist has been on my list of things to watch for a long time. I first heard about it. Scorsese was talking about the importance of Lupino's work. I watched that, and I watched Outrage, and I watched half of Hitchhiker. And I actually don't think that The Bigamist, for me, is the best of her work. It's a little talky, and whereas I think, to me, Outrage, I don't know if you've seen that one in a long time.
Not been a long time, you're right.
It still has some flaws in it, but that is a powerful film, especially the first 15, 20 minutes with the rape and the way she stages the rape and the way she gets into the girl's mind, I think is just really, really powerful and accurate. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I think that Outrage is the strongest I've seen so far of her.
My favorite is Hitchhiker.
Right.
Yes.
Which I didn't see all of, but what I've seen is very powerful.
And again, I love William Tallman, who was one of the signal villains of my generation.
Right.
He made so many films, westerns across the board, and later on, because of Lupino's use of him, and he's in more than one of her films, he wound up getting what was considered a respectable role on Perry Mason. He was Perry's adversary.
Okay.
You see? So he was the district attorney that Perry Mason was always beating in the court trials. But that transitioned him from bad guy to at least the good side of the law.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
That's funny.
But Lupino did go on to direct a lot of television as well. And then later on, she directed a film that I went to see just because of her name, and it was a complete. The title told me what it was going to be.
Oh, it's Trouble with Angels.
Yes. And it was what
it's not a bad film. It's just a Disney film that has no connection to the rest of what she was trying to do.
And what I was looking for was, and I wasn't looking for that to do it, but I was hoping that would open the door for her to go back
to do more,
what she had been doing, but it didn't.
That was the last film.
The
last film she directed.
Yeah, theatrical, and then she did more television. But as I said, I really included her because, small as the body of work is, it was an important body of work, and I thought it would lead to more female actors becoming directors, and later on opening the door for women in film more as directors, and that didn't really happen. But she was a genuine pioneer who doesn't get credit for it.
And it's still pretty rare that we see a female actress turn to directing.
Yeah, I know.
And there's no one consistently. There's no female equivalent of Clooney.
Yeah,
who's working, or Eastwood, or who's consistently making films and directing. Redford. There's no female Redford. Yeah. And someone like, it shows you kind of how little that's progressed. Someone like Catherine Bigelow is a rarity. Yeah. Even just a female director that's consistently working in America and getting recognition. So it's unfortunate. So let's jump into Don Siegel.
Oh, Don Siegel. Well, to me, he's the action man.
Right.
I mean, he's done films, other kind of films.
Right.
What stands out is his action pictures.
Yeah. He's incredible at staging an action scene, is what I was thinking. Because the end of Charley Varrick, the plane versus the car, and he's just able to stage things like that so well. Or the lineup, he stages at the end of the lineup. He stages a great. The guy gets pushed off into a skating rink in a wheelchair, and then there's a chase after that. He's just so good at putting those things together.
Well, one of the things that why I picked him is because, again, to me, he is the epitome of studio craftsmanship. And that's something that gets lost when we talk about tourism, because people begin to think it's a form of self-indulgence, really, supposedly adding your signature to the work. Your signature manifests itself through craftsmanship. Right. And to me, Don Siegel was the quintessential craftsman. I mean, he made small films with Mickey Rooney, low-budgeted films. When he finally hooked up with Eastwood and became his mentor, really, then he became known. But his work before that was so good, like the lineup, like you're talking about. What is that? Machine Gun Kelly, is that the one with
something?
Yeah,
with
can't
remember which one.
And there's so many of them that
Babyface Nelson.
Babyface Nelson is the one. And you look at this work, and I told you last night I watched Charley Varrick, and again, you talk about just visually setting up something. Charley Varrick starts with about 8 or 10 minutes of no dialogue, just visual setting up the heist. And finally, Charley Varrick, I think, says one word, or the policeman or somebody stops him and says one word, and you look at this, and this is, to me, the key craftsman that virtually every film student who's serious about becoming a director should really look at his work. And there are no real studies on his work. There is that book I loaned you.
Siegel film.
Yeah, which is a long series of interviews with him. And that's instructive because it tells you he came from cutting montage and shooting a second unit, which is a very good way to learn how to shoot movies, particularly action.
Yeah.
Yes.
He, but like you said, without being self-indulgent, he, or trying to purposely make his style or imprint his style on the movies, it just developed naturally.
Yes.
Because you can totally tell Varrick and Escape from Alcatraz and The Beguiled and all these movies, you can feel Siegel in all of them. There's we were talking about Escape from Alcatraz. There's I feel like there's a grittiness to all of his movies. There's a almost disturbing grittiness that's kind of underlies all of his movies and the action in his movies and the violence in his movies. That's what I saw in Varrick with the people getting shot in the beginning, and then in Escape from Alcatraz with the man cutting his fingers off. But I felt like there's a connection between this and an underlying disturbing element, even especially in The Beguiled, which I think is one of his most interesting movies. Totally, like I was reading about it, promoted by the studio incorrectly. Underappreciated when it was released, but it's a really interesting psychological study.
I think so. And one of the things, his oddly enough, one of his best known films was Dirty Harry,
right?
Which is a good crafts piece. Yes, it's a good solid crafts piece that was he took over later, to me, it doesn't feel. It didn't feel like a real Siegel film. The guy, when you talk about that, I remember when I first saw it.
Yeah.
I was surprised because of the studio advertising of it.
Right.
Because I found it quite poetic, actually, which was a color you don't always associate with Siegel. But again, it goes back to the craftsmanship, because what a good craftsman, from my perspective, does is looks at the material, determines what is required of it, and then lends his ability to serve that material, doesn't bend the material to accommodate him. And Two Mules for Sister Sarah is the same thing, because he changes that, he doesn't change it around, he lets the material carry it.
The only thing I don't like about that film is it feels too influenced by the spaghetti westerns to me.
Really?
It doesn't. No. I don't know why it doesn't feel, which is ironic because it's written by Bedecker.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like an American western to me. I don't know why it feels too, because it comes right after all of those spaghetti westerns with Eastwood, and to me that's too imprinted on it.
It doesn't feel. I don't feel that way about. Yeah. That's the thing. The other thing that we need to say is that he was Eastwood's complete mentor, to the point where Eastwood even had him on the set. He hired him as an actor on the set of
Play Misty.
Yes, and Eastwood said it. He said, because I want them there so that when I got stuck, I could ask him questions. I thought that was interesting.
And he dedicated Unforgiven to him. Yes. Well, he shared the dedication with Sergio Leone. But the one other film that I wanted to talk about, I recently watched Escape from Alcatraz and appreciated it more for just how lean it is.
Yes.
But the other film I like of his a lot that doesn't get talked about at all is Madigan. I really like Madigan. And he got that police procedural thing so well. And again, the end actions, there's not much action for the whole movie. And then that end scene is so shocking and well done.
Yes.
The shootout. He just really knew how to stage.
And that was a very troubled production. I remember when it was being shot in New York, and there were all kinds of problems with it. Not logistical problems, but ego problems with the actors, Henry Fonda and Widmark, to the point where the title actually got changed. Because the title was High Commissioner, and the book is called High Commissioner. And Widmark insisted, Widmark was a problem for a lot of people, including Siegel. And, what's that film that ultimately became the first, what's the name they use when the directors don't want credit on a film?
Alan Smith.
Smithy film was because of Widmark. having problems, Siegel having problems with Widmark, and he walked off the picture.
Which one?
This was a film called Death of a Gunfighter.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And Siegel was the original director. Because of problems with Widmark, he walked off the picture. A director I got to know well, Robert Totten, he took it over. Okay. He walked off the picture for the very same reason.
Wow.
And to this day, Siegel says that Totten should get more of the credit for that picture than anybody, because he shot more of it, because 2 other directors came in and nobody wanted credit on it.
Right. So it is an Alan Smithy
film.
Okay.
Yes, that's the first.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but then it surprised me that later they wound up working on Madigan together,
right.
And then wound having problems again. But my recommendation of Siegel's work is his craftsmanship. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that I think sets him in the pantheon of my hierarchy,
right.
As a wonderful, wonderful director whose work is underappreciated and should be revisited.
Right. Right. And I was forgetting, my favorite of his work is Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, yes, I've forgotten about that.
The original.
Yes, the original.
Which no one has topped.
Nowhere near.
Not even close.
Yeah. I mean, it became a real part of the language,
right.
And in politics, it even is brought up because of what he did with that.
Right.
And that's, it's funny, we're talking about it and I hadn't thought about it. I'd forgotten. But it's so good. I need to look at that again.
Especially the last half of it is so intense. Okay, so let's talk about Vincent Minnelli.
Oh, yes.
Go for it.
King of musicals, king of melodrama. Right. And he's known for musicals, but not really, to me, appreciated properly for the melodramas that he created. And the thing for me with Minnelli is the fact that his films had a very distinct look. He used Technicolor, both realistically and symbolically, and you see it throughout his films. He was a designer, a photographer, and he designed both costumes and sets, and then a stage director as well. So that by the time he got to Hollywood, he really had a background, in what he was doing. And again, when we talk about the auteur thing, he always said he had a purple patch section.
Yeah.
In all his films, and I can find them and
define purple patch for people that don't understand.
Well, what he means is a moment where he puts his own signature in one scene in a way that sometimes it seems unrelated to the context of the work, but nevertheless it's so integrated with the work that it really, really fits. And unless you point it out, you wouldn't, but once it's pointed out, you say yes. Right. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Oddly enough, to me, his most interesting and in some ways disturbing film is Meet Me in St. Louis.
Okay, which is my favorite of his movies.
The Halloween section is his purple patch. That's genuinely scary.
It is, yes. It's good. It's well done.
It's so well done. And you wouldn't expect it in a musical with that kind of bucolic light feel, to it. You find it in a melodrama. I mean, he has several, 2 Weeks in Another Town. Mm-hmm. When we talk about king of melodramas, you don't want a better one, really, than The Bad and the Beautiful.
Right, which is one of the best movies ever made about movies.
Like that. I mean, he just puts that together so well.
Yeah.
The structure of that goes back to almost what Tarantino ultimately wound up doing with Pulp Fiction and things like that.
Yeah.
He uses that structure and gets no real credit for it. Mm-hmm. Like that. The Clock. Suspense work with Judy Garland. A very interesting, quiet work. Again, there's a sequence in Grand Central Station that takes on a surrealistic quality.
Okay.
Brigadoon, the New York section, when they leave Brigadoon and come back, the frenzy of that and the use of color. And the carnival or it's a state fair kind of atmosphere at the end. Some came running. I mean, there's always that quality in Minnelli. But Minnelli really knew how to, elicit good performances, but also how to use the entire screen.
Right.
And the visual aspect of the film, as I said, is there if you look for it. It enriches the mise-en-scene, but it doesn't overwhelm it. You know, where you say, oh, look at that, he's doing that. You have to look for it. But boy, is it solidly there. Yeah. And so he, as I said, he's known for his musicals, but I highly recommend anyone who's interested in his work supplement looking at the musicals with the melodramas.
You know his work so much better than I do, because there's some that I was even gonna. I didn't have time. I was gonna ask you if I could borrow, because I haven't seen Some Came Running. I haven't seen Home from the Hill. I have seen Bad and Beautiful and 2 Weeks in Another Town, but I'm like looking at his filmography. I was like, wow, I'm only scratching the surface here. But Meet Me in St. Louis is one of the best musicals I think ever made, and he made some other great ones like American in Paris.
Yes. So. And again, I mean, he got all the awards. Yeah, American in Paris was the first musical to win an Academy Award.
Right.
And but still, I just always felt that he's underappreciated. You know, because people always think of him as Mr. Musical, but he made all of those other pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you wanted to discuss another melodrama director, Douglas Sirk, the king of melodrama.
Yes.
Or soap opera.
Yes. Well, you know, I it's interesting because on one level, I really don't like the text of his work, the context. The other level is that he so immerses himself in it that you have to take it on its own terms, you know, like that. And you either look at it and accept it or walk away from it. It's not one where you could sit and say, well, I'm going to sit there and be critical. You just have to say, all right, take me over.
Right.
And I'm talking about Magnificent Obsession. I'm talking about, what's the one?
All That Heaven Allows.
All That Heaven Allows.
And the other one that you actually like, The Written on the Wind.
Oh, yeah.
Is what it's called?
Written on the Wind. But my favorite of his is The Tarnished Angels.
Which I haven't
Which
seen.
is really so nuanced, you know, and quiet. But he did things like Battle Hymn. He did, I think, 7 or 10 films with Rock Hudson, you know, and really found a way to use Rock Hudson very well.
He did, yeah.
Rock Hudson filled those films very, very well. No, I like, and the thing about it, I made a note of, you know, all the directors we mentioned, he is the one that is the most influential.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's influenced.
Which I don't understand.
Yeah, well, I understand it, Fassbinder, okay? Tarantino.
Yeah.
Todd Haynes, you see it.
Todd Haynes is all over the place.
Pedro Almodovar.
Yeah.
Yes, you see it.
Yes.
Lars von Trier, oddly enough. Wong Kar-wai, the romanticism. And John Waters, of course. You know, like those are some of the names of the people.
Funny.
I see it because these are people who fell in love with, I think, these are people who fell in love with the romanticism of movies. Yeah. And you see it in their own film, or they attempt to acquire it in their film. The problem for all of them is they didn't have a studio behind them, because the studio made it possible for the kind of lush photography that he could do and create the incredible sets that he could create, and the gowns. He also had a producer, a guy named Ross Hunter, who bought into that. And Ross Hunter would spend in the 50s $10,000 on a dress, you know, and he'd fill out with underwear, with everything. It would be expensive, and they'd even ask him. They'd say, "Well, who's going to see that?" He said, "I'll know it." Like that. And
that's funny.
That's the thing. I mean, as you said, on one level, I said, yes, I understand the influence, but on another, I don't.
Right.
You know, I'm like you.
Yeah.
Because you say, why aren't you put back by this? But it works for him.
Right.
And that's why I picked him. I put him in rather than, what's his name? Richard Brooks. And I'll mention why I switched Richard Brooks. I forgot to tell you. Was because for me, I had too many writer-directors. And I wanted, because they're not the same, but I frequently feel Blake Edwards and Richard Brooks' career parallel each other in some ways.
Well, Brooks is also, if we're grouping these people together in some way of how influential they are, Brooks is not, to me, as influential as some of these other people have been on modern film.
But I like Brooks.
His career is more uneven, I think, than some of these others.
Well, what attracted me to Brooks, when I was a kid, all these guys, I saw a lot of their films, and I got attracted to their work, was one, I was always an aspiring writer. And I always love movies, and then I'd see written and directed by, and immediately I want to know about this person because they're writing. And then with Richard Brooks, I discovered that he was a novelist before he became a screenwriter, became a director. So that even drew me closer to his work because I was like, oh, I want to watch how this guy did it. I'm going to try to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But anyway, so I dropped him, but who was the next one?
Blake Edwards.
Blake Edwards.
Who is, to me, one of the great master directors of comedy.
Yes. Okay. First of all, my real reason for picking him is we share the same last name. Okay. Yeah. And that's how I started paying attention to him. Right. It's the first time I started paying attention to a director, period, in movies, because I was a kid. I'm there, and there's a guy's name comes up on screen, and he's got the same last name as I do. Who is this guy? I need to know about him. Yeah. And so I started paying attention. I went to see every film that came out. He wasn't always a director. He was sometimes the screenwriter only. Mm-hmm. But I call him, to me, he's the jack of all trades. Okay. Because he made films in so many different areas.
Oh, he did, yeah.
And good films. I've told you about some of the melodramas that Mickey Rooney's, not melodramas, but the noir things that I've seen, the grade B noir things, or low budgeted, I shouldn't say grade B. Mm-hmm. And he is frequently the writer on several of them. Right. He also is the the director on quite a few. But again, my notes on him, the reason I picked him was, I said writer, director, craftsperson. And I list the genres. Mystery, experiment and terror. A melodrama, Soldier in the Rain. Comedy, 10, Panther.
Shot in the Dark.
Yes.
All that stuff.
Yes. Romance, The Tamarind Seed. Drama, Days of Wine and Roses. Sci-fi, The Atomic Kid.
Okay. He wrote that.
Yes. Yeah. Western, The Wild Rovers.
Which is amazing.
Musical, High Tide with Bing Crosby. Right. So here's a guy that goes across the board.
I was shocked when because we talked about Wild Rovers when we discussed William Holt. Mm-hmm. Yes. I was just floored because I know mainly the comedy. Mm-hmm. Blake Edwards with Shot in the Dark and The Party and films like that at 10. Mm-hmm. But when I watched Wild Rovers, I thought, wow, like you said, craftsman, totally just switches genres, and he seems totally organic to that genre. So I haven't seen some of the other films that you've mentioned.
Well, again, I grew up with these films because I grew up as he grew into his career and matured into it.
And I was surprised too, because I like Days of Wine and Roses a lot, and he really just lends himself completely to that as well.
And that goes back to my original point about the craftsmanship that the studio system taught or encouraged from their workers, because you didn't start out as an auteur director or a celebrated director. Right. You started out, in Don Siegel's case, he was doing second unit, he was cutting montage. With Blake Edwards, he was second unit frequently. He wrote grade B pictures, had to graduate out of that, started to write grade A pictures, and then evolved into a director. And then ultimately was able to call his own shots, like that. So, to me, he was, again, one of the ultimate craftspeople, working in cinema. And I said, the whole talk, the reason I picked it is because I come across so many people. I haven't taught filmmaking or film theory in years, but I come across so many people who want to be filmmakers, and every time I talk to them, they don't know the work of the craftspeople. They might know some of the more celebrated people. Right. And what they really lock into are the indulgences of those people, the Hitchcock indulgences, the Fellini indulgences. But to me, where you really learn how to make movies is looking at the work of the craftspeople. And these are some of the people who are totally unappreciated. Right. But the craft is there for all to see.
That's been totally lost. Yes. And I don't know many modern directors who are prominent directors who are really working in that way. They seem to more come out of the tradition of let's be conscious about our style. Yes. And I'm constantly telling people just try different genres and just learn the craft. Don't think about your style. Let it just evolve. Yes. And I love I read recently, Herzog, he says I have purposefully avoided any self-analysis of myself or my work because I feel that it would destroy me. And I think he's right. He doesn't sit there and think, you know, how does this fit into my body of work? Screw that.
Yes.
Like, just keep making the films.
That's ego inflation,
right.
I think. Yeah, like that.
And these people didn't do that.
Well, they couldn't in those days. The studio ran it. The bosses, the studio heads, the Jack Warners, the Louis B. Mayers, the Daryl Zanucks ran it. And they came in every day, looked at your footage and told you what they didn't like about it and go back out and do it again, you see.
Yeah.
And so you learned. You know, even John Ford had that. I mean, John Ford got to a point where he learned how to craftily get around some of that stuff. But he had bosses, and this is the problem you don't have today. This is the situation. You don't have overseers looking at the craft of the work. And so, as I said, so many films are so self-indulgent.
Right.
And when you look at even the grade B pictures that were so good, and consistently so, because of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do we have anybody else?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, that was our 5. Yes, that's a lot.
Yes, it is. So
we actually did 6. We did Brooke Edwards,
Richard
Brooks. Yeah. Anyway.
So I told you that I was kind of wanted to talk about the Australian New Wave.
Okay.
But I want to postpone that because I want to talk about something that I'm interested in right now, which is, and this will be a 2-parter. We'll do the second part later. I want to talk about French cinema before the French New Wave. Mm-hmm. So directors like Jean Renoir, Robert Bresson, Jean-Pierre Melville, Clouzot, who's the one that I'm really interested in right now. Whoever you like, you know, whether it's Carnegie or whatever. But we'll just kind of cover, because I think that the New Wave, the New Wave kind of has stolen the glory of that period, which is such a rich period. And then eventually, not back to back, but eventually I want to do French cinema after the New Wave, and talk about everyone even leading up to Ozon now. But so let's do French cinema before the New Wave.
Okay, because the New Wave actually stole from them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and you see that with Melville and Bresson, that they were the people that started it and got it going. So anyway.
Okay, so there we are. One more time.
See you soon.
Once more onto the breach there, friends. Okay, bye.